Welcome to AI Tools and Perspective, the potential for cultural heritage institutions and responses of researchers. My name is Steven Kleijsens. I'm a curator of digital collections at the KB, the National Library of the Netherlands, and chair of the Europeana Research Community. As you might know, this event is the result of a discussion that took place at the Europeana Research Community discussion list during the first month of this year. Discussion about ChatGPT and other generative AI-powered tools and underlying models. It was, I think, a discussion that echoed discussions all over the web, basically, but with a focus on cultural heritage and humanities research. Now, even if we limit ourselves to cultural heritage sector, no event can address all aspects of a given technology, especially not this one. As we all know by now, there are ethical, legal, social, technological, environmental issues. So there's a lot of hype. There's the danger of the stochastic parrot, and we witnessed the birth of the prompt engineer. So what can we do today? Well, we invited 3 experts, 2 of which took part in the discussion. And each of them will shed light on the potential of AI within a different heritage domain, being libraries, museums, and archives. And after that, Professor Seamus Ross will open the floor to all of you. And our aim is to solicit a response on the potential and limits of AI in the heritage sector. Now, before I introduce you to our experts for today, 2 more things. One, in the days leading up to today's event, a few other events have been announced that might be of interest to you, and I'll put the links in the chat. A link to the Call of Europeana Tech Conference in October, and the call is still open. A link to the recent announcement of the 4th Fantastic Futures Conference in November this year, and a link to a registration page from our colleagues at Europeana Copyright Community, who are organizing an online copyright office hour to discuss AI and copyright in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. And secondly, a few housekeeping rules. Make sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you have any questions, do feel free to enter them in the chat or raise your hand after all 3 presentations. And as you've probably heard, this session will be recorded. Now, our first expert, Dr. Heli Kautonen, is a library director at the Finnish Literature Society. She's a member of the executive board of LIBER, the Association of European Research Libraries, and chair of the LIBER Quarterly Editorial Board, the peer-reviewed open access journal of LIBER. Dr. Kautonen's research interest focused on the adaptation of new information and communication technologies, specifically AI, in the work, processes, and services of research libraries. Heli, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Excited, as many of you, of this event, and I have the honor to be the first speaker in this event too. And I humbly thank Stephen Alba and others from Europeana for inviting me to share my perspectives and views on AI. I've divided my talk into 3 sections. First, I think it's relevant to tell you a few words about my background, so that you can see what my viewpoint is, from which perspective I view the phenomenon of AI. Then I will share my knowledge and understanding how AI has been approached in the context of research libraries. And finally, I will present some thoughts of how we can build a desirable future with AI. As you will see, my talk and my slides include more questions than answers, I'm afraid. Still, I have a take-home message for you, which is an analog or idiom to the famous proverb about planting a tree. You know, the best time for planting a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. Similarly, the best time for familiarizing and taking over the matters of artificial intelligence in the CLAM context, in the DH context, in the research context, I think it was 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. So let's begin and locate my viewpoint. I started my career in 1990s as a teacher in the Polytechnic School for Executive Assistants. My greatest achievement, I suppose, was that I managed to encourage and build professional confidence with IT tools in young girls and boys who considered that IT was something that they feared and detested and didn't understand. The second achievement, I think, was the fact that during my years in the service of the National Library of Finland, user-centered design and UX approaches, user experience approaches, were embedded into the development of the National Library, the service of the National Library of Finland, discovery service called Finna. During those years, I also became familiar with all archives, libraries, and museums in Finland, as their materials were joined in the Finna service. And at that time as well, in 2011, 2012, I also became aware of Europeana and have been following Europeana ever since. The last picture on the right is from my library at the moment. 5 years ago, I was chosen to lead the Library of Finnish Literature Society, which has given me yet another viewpoint to cultural heritage and research, particularly digital humanities, because Finnish Literature Society hosts also a research department. Currently, there are 2 research projects going on in the society. Our researchers have a key position as humanists in these 2 projects, COCO and Filter, where more or less intelligent technology is being developed by our techie partners in universities in Finland. My perspective has also widened through involvement in LIBE, as Stephen introduced me, the Association of European Research Libraries. I serve in the executive board, and I have also been involved in building the new strategy for LIBE. I am happy to say that the impact of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, was seriously considered when the process of building the strategy instead of making a separate point of this new technology, this has been asked from me a couple of times, I dare say that it's included in all 5 priorities that you see on the screen at the moment. Libraries as engaged and trusted hubs, state-of-the-art services, advancing open science, upholding rights and values, and finally, upskilling the library workforce. I personally am involved with the 5th one, upskilling the library workforce, and the relevant element in this is AI, absolutely and indeed. So, how do libraries currently see the phenomenon of AI? In the media, if the media has only recently, after the launch of ChatGPT, noticed the so-called new spring of AI technologies, I am proud to say that libraries have seen the signs and addressed this new technology for years now. I think I heard the concept already when working in the National Library of Finland, and the first dedicated event I attended was Fantastic Futures 2018. I think that it was the first one in the row, and happy to hear that there is the next one this year. I can highly recommend it. As you can see from the picture, AI is usually connected with sci-fi associations, but it is not that for libraries any longer. The concept itself is ambiguous, and I've noticed that many of my colleagues start the discussion by arguing against the term itself. It's too ambiguous. You have to speak about machine learning, you have to speak about data science and so on. Of course, that is important, but I prefer to be liberal. For me, artificial intelligence, AI, means anything and everything if needed. I want to view the big picture. I also find it fascinating how many viewpoints and opinions librarians can take to this phenomenon. If some libraries, such as the national libraries in Finland and Norway, have taken the ambitious and, for us, so very valuable step in developing these technologies, developing more efficient classification and indexing, better discovery services, and so on. There are other libraries who have approached AI from the viewpoint of, for example, information literacy or only AI ethics. There are, of course, voices warning against the risks or fearing the consequences of AI. To understand this diversity, Andrea Gasparini from the University of Oslo Library and myself, we have conducted an extensive literature review, which was published last year. In addition to looking at the role, understanding the AI technology in itself, we examined the publications from the viewpoint of libraries and librarians, and also inspected how authors describe the role of libraries in the ecosystem powered by AI. We share a mutual interest in user experience, and therefore we examined the role given to the end user, the library customer, for example, a researcher. And as you can see here, there are many, even contradictory roles given to these players, depending on the focus of interest in each paper. Because the phenomenon and the technology itself is ambiguous and complex, but also because all the related aspects are complex, we speak for, Andrea and myself, we speak for designerly approaches. And why not approach AI in libraries using the design methods, designerly thinking, which have been found useful in similar circumstances. So finally, a view to the future. Where are we going and how should we go there? I have an idea, or we share the idea, that future is what we make it. And also, and maybe especially in regard to new technologies. One of the alarming signs for me is the fact that currently the public discourse and the development of AI technologies seems to be dominated by for-profit commercial global companies. That indicates that the business as usual may not be possible, not any longer. Therefore, we have to build out preferable futures. As this event and the flow of messages on the European mailing list showed, we in the GLAM sector and research community are alert. And we pose the relevant questions. And next I will present some of these questions and answers that Andrea Gasparini and myself have gathered from several workshops that we've conducted for research libraries in Finland, Norway, and wider in Europe. The first question for all of us, sooner or later, should concern the basic concepts. The second question, where to begin? Although our colleague, our peer, would be enthusiastic about, for example, Transcribus, a written text recognition for digital objects, if that is not part of our work or our priorities, then why waste time and effort on that tool? There is surely an AI application that is familiar to we, us, you in your cooperations. This is indeed an AI spring. New tools appear in the landscape every day. And please notice, I dare say that Twitter is not the reliable source for learning the basics. I encourage, for example, checking the elements of AI courses or the UNESCO Quick Start Guide for that. The most pressing question that we've come across during the past 6 months concerns the relevancy. How to know which tool to invest in, time or money, which to experiment with, which will be useful in the future. Well, isn't that a question why we have strategies for? And the core aspect of strategy is goal setting. There is no such thing as one tool to fit them all. If the National Library of Finland finds a relevant tool for them, it is surely not a relevant tool for us because we've outsourced some of the operations that the National Library of Finland is doing in-house. Well, after goal setting, during the workshops, the most rewarding exercise has been the phase when librarians have been encouraged to draw a roadmap from their goal or vision to the current reality. And we found that backcasting has been a useful method for this kind of future making. Finally, the question we saw when we registered to this event, feeling of competence. I would say that we are more competent than we think we are in the libraries and also in the GLAM sector. As you noticed, there was a circular model that I presented along these slides. It is a construct of Andrea Gasparini and myself called B-Wheel. And if you want to know more about it, it's available for you online. I can share the link later on the chat. In the document, we provide examples of activities where AI can be applied and tools for these practices. The current B-Wheel is for libraries, thus the word letter B, bibliotek, in the title. Well, as you saw, there were more questions than answers in my presentation. Sorry for that. From my perspective, approaching AI in libraries, archives and museums, and in research is more like learning arts and crafts. There are no shortcuts. We need to learn the concepts, test, experiment, prioritize, and focus, and take an active role. Act locally together with our peers, with our networks, with our partners, like LIBER does. Okay, thank you for your attention and eager to hear the next presentations and also join you in the discussion, hear your perspectives in that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haley. You promised us a lot of questions and you delivered, I think. Go over to the next speaker, Alison Kupiecki, the Collections Database Manager at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and is responsible for the development, construction, and maintenance of the museum-wide information system, including its collections management and its digital asset management systems. Dr. Kupiecki is currently conducting research on AI and its uses in cataloging museum collections, and has presented on topics such as cataloging large photo collections and using AI and crowdsourcing to address bias in metadata generation for intangible heritage. Alison.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here amongst my peers and my colleagues. All right, so thank you to Haley, and I'm going to continue some of her thoughts and go in a bit of a different direction because our focus is museums, which is a little bit different than libraries, but there are a lot of similarities. I had the opportunity to investigate some artificial intelligence tools, and I wanted to share some of the research I did. So the museum, the Israel Museum, which is in Jerusalem, has participated in Europeana projects over a very long period of time since it began. And we've had an opportunity to be involved with some specific collections, and even contributed not just items, but also thesauri. So in the case of Europeana fashion, we contributed to the vocabulary, which has 11 languages, including Hebrew. And so you can search in Hebrew. The word blue is up on the screen now, and you'll find items which were not cataloged in Hebrew. So this is some of the research that we've been involved in with Europeana. We also had some cooperation with Google, and we were involved with the art project and with Wikipedia and Wikidata. So that was just to give you a little bit of background about how we're interested in corporations and linked open data. But specifically for our talk today, I'm in charge of the collections management system and the digital asset management system. And in incorporating the 1 million images into a digital asset collection, I began investigating how can AI help us catalog our collection and not have to review the 1 million images one at a time, and what issues should I be aware of. So I'm joking, but it actually happened. I asked ChatGPT to create for me what implementation steps would they recommend for creating a workflow in a museum that's beginning the digital asset management implementation. And it came out with these points. And I have to say, when I tested ChatGPT for other things that curators would be doing, for example, analyzing an artwork or investigating a research an artist, it failed. But here it was very useful. So all kidding aside, this was helpful in a museum environment. So I was talking about cooperations, and the standards for images interest me greatly. And the idea of seeing what a digital asset management system could do on its own and how it could be helped using artificial intelligence was definitely very interesting. So I'm presenting to you some tests, but I have to tell you now that not everything was successful. And I'm sharing some of the work that was done, and at the end, I'll share also which programs were used. So I started using Google Images before we had the digital asset management tool, which should be doing all the tasks on the left here, importing images, exporting images. But at the bottom, you'll see artificial intelligence for facial recognition. And I found that fascinating. I'm going to put GDPR aside for the moment. We're not going to discuss that right today. But let's just think about how useful it is in a museum setting to be able to find an artist's face among all the photos that you have. So I want to show you what I found. When cataloging large photo collections, I investigated the following question: is it biased? And I'm going to tell you very early on that it is. So the first step for me was to read the AI in relation to GLAM's task force report and recommendation. And from that, I gathered a list of tasks that I wanted to test: visual recognition of objects and subjects, facial recognition of artist staff or VIPs, optical character recognition of typed text, handwritten text recognition, recognition of numbers, audio to text, and search and retrieval tools. So those were my goals. And I found almost immediately that there was a bias: gender, racial, and language algorithms. And we're going to talk more about that soon. So let's go through them. The visual recognition tools, for example, were tested at the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And they have on their website a history of this project that they did. And at the very end of the project here, they write that the work which they thought they would automate has now been taken up by the staff, meaning that the project basically failed when they tried to identify images on old exhibition photos. How else can it be used? Well, I have quite a good visual memory. When you work in a museum, you have the ability to remember something, but not always do I know how it was cataloged. So I remember that there was an old photograph of an artist, a woman artist from the early 1900s on a donkey, and I was looking for it. And I wasn't sure how it was cataloged, but I remember there was a donkey in the photo. So I used this idea of typing in the word donkey, which was not cataloged anywhere in the caption. And it found it because it identified the donkey. But if you see, it also identified camels as donkeys and cows as donkeys. So it was not 100% correct, but it gave me what I was looking for. Another sample here is the cable cars. It found things that have cables, but none of these are cable cars. So it does an interesting association job between words and images, but obviously you need human interaction with the results. I think the most successful experiment was this, where I began with a photograph on the right here of an artist that was identified. I had a photo of him in the archives, and I uploaded it and identified him. And then I asked the Google Images to identify other images with his face. And it managed to in the middle, you can see, find within hundreds of thousands of images that I have scanned from the photography laboratory. It found the artist at an opening of an exhibition in 1998. And it also found, this I found the most surprising, on the left, a painting which he painted of himself. So here it was very impressive. There were problems though when I began trying to upload women. And if you see here, I had I have about 800 photographs of Israeli artists, and they were identified. So I uploaded also women. And while with men, as you can see, it identified VIPs and collectors, and it was able to identify artists. But with women, it started to mix up a lot of women together, and it made them into one. That didn't happen so often with men. So although there were corrections that were needed, it managed to find men without a problem. And this was seen over and over again. I'll just give a few more examples of how I used AI. So I had 2 old photographs, and I wasn't sure if it was the same person. I knew the year it was photographed, and I had AI identify the age of the person in the photo. And that's how I figured out that it's 2 different people. A questionable opportunity, if I can bring to your front here, is bringing images to life. And it's a problem that I'm bringing in front of you because I took a photograph from the collection and I used an animation tool to create from a black and white photo an animation of this artist. Now, how would the family feel after his passing, seeing him artificially moved like this? I would have to get, obviously, their permission. If you're not familiar with this tool, the Deep Nostalgia tool, DID, this is how it works. And if you're interested about it, you can look it online. But in the same vein, when I began to use it to recognize the face of other artists, I chose the artist, the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. It did not see a face. Okay, so I said, well, he has his hands in front of his eyes. Maybe it's confusing the computer, the AI. But on the other hand, here too, a face wasn't found. So I took another portrait, not from my collection, but rather from the Library of Congress. And I tested to see if I would have this happen again. And here it did manage to find his face. So as we can see, there are problems and biases with facial recognition. When you do a search for a word that's descriptive, like beauty, in this case, you can see a lot of women, 1 man. And I'm not the first, obviously, to notice this. So Time Magazine, Harvard University, and MIT speak about gender and facial recognition. I'm just going to, because the time is a bit short, and I'm just going to go quickly through a few more samples, which I found and I thought might be interesting to you. So successes, as opposed to facial recognition, the Google Images managed very well to read text from the wall. I uploaded images from past exhibitions and I searched for the word beyond and it could read it off the wall. Or translation of text, obviously there are problems, but it definitely did some work for me. Old fonts, there were problems, but again, and calligram that you can obviously see it doesn't look like it did originally, but it did catch most of the letters. Handwriting, it failed, and I agree with my colleague who spoke before. And number recognition in images, even handwritten numbers, it managed to do a pretty good job. Audio to text in videos, it did okay, but I used YouTube, for example, to listen, but it works pretty well with English. Once you start to use other languages or a data film where they're making guttural sounds, it didn't work very well. Editing and translating using YouTube was also very helpful. I think what impressed me the most was that I could search in any language, and even if the text was not translated, here I'm searching for the word Paris in Hebrew, and there are various spellings, and it picked them up not just in the title and not just in the images itself that had the word Paris, but also in the internal data, which is hidden in the images. So I wanted to show just 2 or 3 samples, which are very quick, of how AI could be used within the museum, where we are able to dress a black and white photo with the dress that's in the gallery using interpolation. And DALL-E gave me a challenge where I took a plate from our collection, and it's an Arbor Day plate for fruit. And I asked DALL-E to put the fruit on the plate, and it did a pretty good job, except it didn't recognize that these are Hebrew letters and it jumbled them a bit. So all in all, in conclusion, there's room for improvement. AI should be taken with a grain of salt. Auto-generated tags should be marked, and faults can be improved in the future. And of course, humans are still needed. So here's a list of some of the programs that I tested, and I hope this was helpful to all of you out there trying also to see how it can work in your institution. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lot to digest. Thank you. But we'll go over from the museums to the archives. Eng Seng Savin, the reference archivist at the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, UNESCO in Paris. Her current research as part of the interdisciplinary project Inter Pares Trust AI is focused on archives, digitization, and artificial intelligence. And she's co-editor of record keeping in international organizations, archives, and transition in digital network environments. And
thank you very much. And thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. So as Stephen mentioned, I will be speaking from the perspective of archives. And of course, I won't pretend to speak for all archives, but I will be speaking about some research that is being done currently in the field of archives. Let me just, oh yeah, okay. So I'll be speaking first of all on some preliminary results of a survey on the uses of AI for digitization of archival and documentary heritage materials that is currently ongoing until May 15th. And that's part of a study that is being conducted that I'm a part of for Inter Pares Trust AI. And then I'll be talking about a separate project, but related. It's a practical project in the UNESCO archives to apply AI to descriptions, archival descriptions of audio recordings that were digitized. And finally, I'll just give an overview of some Inter Pares Trust AI studies and give you a general introduction to it, just because I find it's a good way to get a sense of what's happening in terms of how archivists are thinking about and approaching and engaging with AI. So first of all, I'll talk about this survey, and I'll just do a quick plug. It's still on until May 15th. We have right now about 180 responses, and we're hoping to reach 200. And so it's on, you can Google JotForm digitization and AI, Allison, I would love it if you would fill out the survey because the work that you just showed us is fascinating. And so just an overview, the survey is part of a study looking at AI-assisted digitization. And when we say digitization, we mean specifically the conversion of physical archival materials or documentary heritage materials into digital copies. And the aim of the survey is to understand the current state of digitization within organizations. I'm sure you're all familiar with this because a lot of organizations are currently dealing with this. We want to understand whether organizations are using AI in their digitization projects, and if so, in what ways, and trying to understand the drivers, barriers, risks, and challenges of using AI in relation to digitization. And I'll just share some of the preliminary results based on 160 responses. So the survey has 4 sections, and I'm only concentrating on the last section, which deals specifically with AI. And so question 37 is, has your organization considered using AI models or tools during your digitization projects or programs? And 36% said yes, and 64% said no. So already that's an interesting idea of the landscape. And then the next question is about, has your organization used in-house custom developed AI models or tools? The coloring is off, I think, here. So yes is 21% and no is 74%. So 21% said yes, and then 5 weren't sure. And then the next question is about whether organizations have used off-the-shelf tools like Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Vision, some of the tools that Allison just mentioned in her presentation. And some organizations, 21% of organizations said they had used off-the-shelf tools, and 64% said no, they haven't. And then we get a little bit more detail into what organizations have been using AI for. At the bottom, you see transcription, speech to text is 9 responses. These aren't percentages, they're actually just the account of the people who mentioned these in their responses, because respondents could fill in as many responses as they wanted. So speech to text, and then OCR, those were the top 2. And then handwritten text recognition, there were 4 respondents. 3 people said quality control, and then 2 people said language identification. 2 people said topic classification, and then also automatic metadata and film processing. And computer vision, only 2 people said that they had used that. And another question was, what aspects of the AI tools used helped to achieve the digitization objectives or processes? So basically, how was AI helpful for you? 10 people said that it improved searchability, discovery, and access of the resources through either OCR, HTR, or transcription. 4 people said it saved time, like saved staff time. It was less labor intensive and sped up workflows. 2 people said it turned text into computational data that could be worked with in whatever ways. I won't read all of the responses, but you can kind of get a sense here. One person said it improved quality control, and one specific response was about getting color information from a film system that they weren't able to get before. And then what aspects of the AI tools used restricted or negatively affected the digitization objectives? Quite a few people said there was an inaccuracy or ineffectiveness of the tool used, and they mentioned some of the ways they were using it, like transcripts for metadata creation and handwritten text recognition. So just some anecdotal responses. Somebody said it took more time to fix the transcription than it would just to transcribe something by hand. The image recognition tools didn't assign useful tags or classifications, and most of the most of the frequently used search tags are much more specific than assigned by the AI tool. And ChatGPT would just fabricate data like film synopses. And then a few other ways, inefficiency, 6 people said that. So as in required staff intervention, there was a clunkiness with the software. Somebody said that it is time consuming and requires a lot of attention to minimize bias in the training, validation, and testing. And then there were a few other sort of more practical responses, like increased storage demands of the OCR because of the file size, the poor quality of the OCR, the cost of the software. 2 people said they didn't notice any negative effects so far. And this was an interesting comment. The belief that AI will solve everything has for several years led our organization to divert resources away from tasks that higher management believe can be solved by AI. Vital tasks are postponed to a vague and undefined utopian future. So there's really quite a range, an interesting range of responses and experiences. And remember that these are the people that said yes, that they had been implementing AI in their tools. So it's an interesting diversity of responses so far. And then another question was, has your organization identified any potential risks or drawbacks of using AI and digitization? And about 38% said yes, 32% said no, and then 28% said not sure. And then again, just please elaborate on this question. So I think this is actually a repeat of the last slide, so I'm going to skip this. And then one of the last questions was, in your view, what are 3 types of AI tools that potentially address the greatest need or offer the greatest benefit during digitization? And at the top, there's OCR and HCR, and then metadata management, and classification or tagging, and then automatic transcription, quality control, translation, and image restoration and summarization came in at the end. So, so again, those were just some of the results from the survey, and we'll publish a more detailed survey analysis when we get all of the results in. And I do encourage anyone here who's interested to fill out the survey until May 15th. And now I'm just going to talk briefly about a project that we're implementing at the UNESCO Archives in partnership with the University of British Columbia Natural Language Processing Lab. And again, this is part of Inter Partes Trust. So this is a project that asks, how can AI enable better description of archival audio recordings? And what we're doing is we're looking at a data set of 6,700 digitized audio recordings. That's the sample that we're working with, but there are actually 17,000 digitized audio recordings in total that we may also apply AI to, depending on how the first sample works. It's an interesting data set because it's very diverse. There's 70+ recognized languages in the audio recordings, mostly French and English, and a lot of the recordings have more than one language in them. And the time period is from the 1940s to the 1980s. They are audio recordings digitized from magnetic reel-to-reel audio tape. So our project goals are to understand the relationship between the physical original and its digital copy, and evaluate whether diplomatic analyses apply to various genres. So this is, I know a lot of you aren't archivists, so the idea of diplomatic analysis probably is not very familiar, but it's a way of analyzing the different segments, for example, of a document or of a particular forum, to see whether what they can tell you about authenticating that that particular thing. And it's very experimental. It's never been done in audio recordings before, as far as we know. So we want to do a diplomatic analysis to see whether AI can actually, whether this can facilitate AI analysis of audio recordings. And then see how AI models can improve performance during our workflows, and then analyze the risks and biases. Let's see. Okay, so these are we're applying 4 different types of AI interventions on the audio recordings. Spoken language identification, so testing whether AI can help us identify the more than 70 languages. And our challenge is that we as humans, most people don't speak more than 70 languages. And so we're limited in that sense. So we're wondering if AI can help us with that. Transcription, so speech to text transcription to save time and to be able, we're wondering if instead of having to listen to an auto recording, to be able to summarize it quickly, if being able to just look at a page and summarize it quickly will save time. Speech translation to English. So again, this is where the human limitations in language understanding comes in. A lot of the recordings, most of the staff, even within an international organization like UNESCO, we don't understand a lot of the recordings. So we're going to see how well AI can help us translate various languages, including ones that aren't necessarily, well, a lot of AI models aren't necessarily trained well on. And then summarization, so see if the AI can produce a 3-sentence description required by our metadata standards. We've done a preliminary sample, and so I don't have any results or any findings to share with you yet. But hopefully in the next years, you'll hear more about this project. And now I'll just quickly talk about Enterprise Trust AI. So it's a multidisciplinary project, and it's also interdisciplinary. It includes not only archivists, but librarians, people who work in museums, computer scientists, AI experts, and people working in organizations in the private sector, in government, in nonprofit. So it's really, the idea is really to work with different types of specialists and people in different contexts. And so the main goals, it's international, so we have specialists from all over the world. And the main goals are to identify specific AI technologies that can address critical records and archives challenges. And actually, I should mention also that it's being directed out of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. They have an archival and library master's program there and PhD program as well. And the co-directors are both working out of the University of British Columbia. So there's Luciana Duranti, who is a big name in the archival field, and Muhammad Majid Abdul. He is the Canada Research Chair in machine learning. I might have gotten that wrong. I don't know his exact title, but he's Canada Research Chair in AI, in natural language processing, I think. And he's a linguist and computer scientist. So another goal is to determine the benefits and risks of using AI technologies in records and archives, ensure that archival concepts and principles inform the development of responsible AI. So really thinking about an ethical approach to AI and bringing a critical lens to the use of AI, the use and application of it, and to validate the objectives of number 3 through case studies and demonstrations. And just to give you an idea of the different areas that research is being done on in the field of archives, at least within the Inter-Parties Network, the studies are divided in working groups, and So this gives you a really good idea of the areas. So there's creation and use, creation of records and archives and the use of them, appraisal and acquisition, arrangement and description, retention and preservation, management and administration, and reference and access. And I just took an example project or study from each area just to give you an idea of kind of what exactly we are looking at. So the first one is in the area of management and administration. It's actually a comparative assessment of ethical codes of in the archival and records management sector and AI communities. And so it's kind of a cross-cutting study that is really focusing on our ethical principles and how do they align in each of these areas, archives and AI. The next study is in the working group appraisal and acquisition, and it's looking at using AI for retention and disposition in digital information and record keeping systems. And again, retention and disposition is a very archival term, but basically it means the analysis of whether a record should be kept permanently or for how long archives should be kept. There's another one in retention and preservation on looking at critical archival challenges as best candidates for AI in the context of preservation of digital records. And then this one is interesting. It's in the area of arrangement and description. It's looking at AI in the Middle Ages. So trying to apply handwritten text recognition technologies on manuscripts from the Middle Ages. And it's being run by a colleague out of Italy. In the reference and access area, there's one case study looking at the extraction and identification of records containing personal data and sensitive personal data for long-term preservation, which is quite a complex area. And they're actually running into challenges in terms of even finding data sets that they can use because of the privacy challenges. But this is also a very interesting area that a lot of archives encounter in terms of privacy. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was impressive. I'll quickly pass on the baton to Professor Seamus Ross, Professor of Information at the University of Toronto and member of the Research Advisory Board at Europeana. Seamus.
So I want to thank our three speakers for very, very valuable presentations about libraries, archives, and museums. I'm going to take up, I was going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to try to make it only 3 because I really want to create an opportunity for the participants to ask questions, both of the speakers, but also to ask general questions that we can think about taking forward. So since November, I'm in the education sector, really, with an interest in the cultural heritage. Since November, the education sector has been filled with lots of concern about the impact of generative AI on learning and teaching in the university. Tools such as ChatGPT and ChatSonic and others have changed the opportunities for students to gather information, to construct essays. And it's interesting, at first, we could be afraid of this, but after reflecting on it, the real problem is how do we educate students to ask really fantastic questions, to actually use this technology effectively? How do we educate students to, when they've used these tools, to validate the findings? And I found in Ketonen's presentation, she drew attention to the complexity of the landscape in libraries and the very important notion that we need to focus on design thinking and AI machine learning applications in our sector. This concept of ML and the cultural heritage by design, it must be a central theme that we take forward. The application of ML by design. Particularly helpful also was for drawing attention to the foresight model that suggests that there is a preferable future in our sector and that we need to understand how to achieve this. And this means conceptualizing. I actually use that VORS model in my teaching, because it forces students to think about the different kinds of futures that technologies can help you to can result in. And there is a preferable one. And by developing competencies, by using ML by design, we should be able to help shape a preferable future in our sector. Also, she drew attention to the importance of competence building as a community. And one of the questions that we should be asking today is, how can the work of that's happening in our community be better shared, and how can we all build competences more effectively? Alison Kapinski focused on tests that were being done with her digital asset management environment, visual tests. And the interesting thing was, she pointed out that it found cables, but not cable cars. Wow, I started working in AI in the 1980s, and I felt wonderful if I could design a tool that, using textual descriptors, could discriminate between two objects. If we got to a point where we can find cables, it's not going to be long before we can find the cable cars. But she did quite rightly draw attention to the gender, racial, and language biases that actually are quite common in the variability of performance of, for example, in facial recognition. These gender, racial, and language biases are hugely common in both in the training data sets that are used and in the systems themselves. So Eng Savang's discussion of the survey that was conducted about AI and digitization was illuminating in the diversity of perceptions of how AI plays a role in archival organizations. The audio recording project is a great example of the kind of experimentation that can be done. And diplomatic analysis has a long history in the archival profession. And Luciano Durante, who Eng mentions, did a wonderful essay many years ago about how it continues to be relevant in the digital archival context. And it'll be fascinating to see this kind of experimentation that's coming out of the UNESCO project in collaboration with the Inter Pares Trust AI. There are many, but she also in this draws attention to the really important aspect that Kapinski also noted, the important aspect of experimentation. Experiment. So there are some, besides Inter Pares Trust AI, there are some other really fascinating projects happening in archives, such as Lustri and AI for LAM. And those of you, AI for LAM, and I'll drop it into the chat in a moment, has a great list of projects that are ongoing in the area that's very useful. And there is also the case that sensitivity analysis is a powerful tool for AI and ML in the digital context, provide a wonderful mechanism for doing sensitivity analysis of archival material. So as a community, we need to constantly not just be asking questions about what these technologies can help us do, but we need to be experimental and conduct experimentation. But I also want to draw attention to the fact that there are moral and ethical issues that we should be thinking about. Whether we should be always asking the question, are we doing harm with these technologies, or are we allowing harm to happen? Are there unintended and unanticipated consequences? And how will we address those if they should emerge? We should think about rights issues. Does the use of these technologies infringe personal rights, the rights of individuals, the rights of society? And finally, maybe we should consider adopting what Carol Gilligan and Virginia Held's notions of the ethics of care, which stresses our responsibility and the relational nature of our interactions as humans. And the ethics of care builds, to quote from her, the ethics of care builds concern and mutual responsiveness to the need on both the personal and wider society level. It recognizes the relational and care responsibilities of humans. And when we apply these technologies, I think we need to be conceptualizing questions of ethics of care in the background. So drawing out I think there are these moral issues that I want you to bear in mind, but I also think that if we were to take away three takeaways from this, that AI and ML by design in the cultural heritage sector is essential, that experimentation, whether in the different kinds of technologies, needs to be carried out consistently and reported broadly in the community, and that we need to build competences and collaborate to make that happen. So I now turn it over to the community for you to ask questions, and we'll try to moderate those as best we can. But I want to thank our speakers for their terrific presentations and for setting a stage for what's going to be a great conversation. Thank you.
So thank you so much for organizing this and for all your insightful projects. It's very good to have this discussion because, well, I've never seen the Europeana community so active on anything before. I mean, by email, of course. So I have a few things I'd like to ask. So personally, I've used ChatGPT in cultural heritage, and I've done a few tests with it to check how is it faring. And it's not doing bad, but we have to consider that it doesn't have as much data as an expert in cultural heritage at the moment does. So for me, it's like a better alternative than like a Google search, for example. And then from then you can do your own research. So I agree that it's not going to replace us just yet. The other thing is about bias. So personally, I haven't found bias in my tests, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I've seen a lot of people raise this issue. And I have a question. So a month ago, Stable Diffusion launched their own language model AI. The difference between Stable Diffusion and OpenAI is that Stable Diffusion is something you can actually download and create your own library and feed it data. So, well, a lot of AI projects do that already, but this is like, for the first time on a personal level, you can do it yourself. So I'm asking, so would that actually increase or decrease bias, the ability for everyone to take AI offline and upload whatever they want in it? So that was my question.
If I may,
Yes, please.
I cannot, I won't answer that because I think that the last question of Hatina is good for the audience as well, because there may probably people more knowledgeable than myself of that question. But I would like to comment about ChatGPT and my notion about knowing the concepts. This is a common thing. For example, I myself and also the researchers in the Finnish Literature Society and also librarians, archivists, our first idea of ChatGPT would be that, well, it's another Google, but it is not. It is a language model. It just generates language. So it doesn't have a background data as Google has. So that is what I meant, that first, we have to, that is our first task, to understand what we are dealing with. And as you, Seamus, said, it is also our task with our researchers. If you are in an institution that educates the next generation and does research, so it is our responsibility also to understand the basics, to be able to help ourselves and help our peers and also our stakeholders. But that's only my comment I wish to share.
So does anyone else want to comment on Stable Diffusion?
I'll respond very quickly to that. In answer to the question, I think that it's up to us to make Stable Diffusion a good thing, with exactly what Seamus was talking about, experimentation, sharing diverse data sets. Hopefully this is a tool that will inspire organizations with diverse data to download their diverse data and try to see if they can correct biases in the original data that is feeding the AI. So I think it really depends on who will be using these tools, and I think in some senses it points to our active responsibility in a way to try to make sure that we correct as much as possible, or ensure there's a diversity of data that's out there that we're teaching AI models on. And then in terms of ChatGPT, I will just say maybe a controversial thing, which is that I do agree that it is mostly a language output generator, but I have heard anecdotal information from colleagues that they're also using it to strategize, to think, to come up with ideas. And I think this is kind of an interesting sort of fringe benefit. People are starting to ask ChatGPT to come up with ideas for them. So, that challenges a little bit the idea that it's simply just generating language.
Yeah, and I noticed that Allison had done that. That's a very good point, that Allison had done that in her in preparation for her talk. Allison, did you want to add anything?
I would like to add maybe that I did use it successfully in trying to present and socialize a work process for a new project, but I did find that it failed when I was hoping it would help me with research on artists or writing labels or any of the curatorial work that needed deep thinking and knowledge. So I guess I don't know if that answers another facet here, but it's clear that there's still a ways for it to go.
Yeah, I might just add that's a great point. That one of the problems, of course, is the training data sets that are used. ChatGPT is trained on the internet up to 2021, I think it is. ChatSonic, which is another tool, uses it actually uses both the trained data set and the live internet, but the internet is not the greatest knowledge base that one might use for training. So I'd be very interested actually to have a look at Stable Diffusion and see what it's trained on and how you can use data sets to train it. And these new data sets are extremely important as an issue within our sector. How do we get the right kind of data sets out there that we can use to train these models? So I see Poland Light. Question. Poland, go ahead, please.
Hello, and thank you very much for the great presentations. I had a more practical question. So ChatGPT is created by OpenAI, which is a not-for-profit organization, but it's heavily heavy connections with Microsoft and other businesses. My question is, Internet is, for example, was a government project, but these AI models or language models are mostly corporations. Does this raise any concern in you, or do you think this is something better or worse, or does it not matter at all?
Good question, thank you. Allison or Eng or Haley?
I know I wasn't on the panel, but I have a kind of view on this. I think it's a little bit concerning to me that large organizations have so much control over the language models that we use at the moment. And it's why in my work, I've always kind of pushed to make everything open source, downloadable, available, including all of the data sets. But I think one of the main limits is that where they've achieved incredible performance, they've done it using hardware which is completely inaccessible to anybody outside of these large institutions. If you think about the hardware restrictions, they're using thousands of machines for weeks or even in the worst cases, months. Even if anybody outside of these organizations could get hold of the model and the weights, they could never actually use them or even run inference on it.
That's a very really great point about the computational requirements.
I'll just jump in and say that, yes, I do think that this is a big concern. There's a report that Stanford publishes every year on the major AI trends. And one of their findings is that private companies and private enterprise are driving AI research now, and that's a change in the from in the last few years. And I do think that this could change the way that AI evolves and how, what actually drives it. And it's worth looking at this report. So I'll just put the link in the chat there to the report. And also, there was another article. It was, I think, OpenAI's founder who was saying that, declaring that the era of big data sets is over, and that now it's like looking at smaller data sets because of the sheer computational GPU power that is needed to process all of these data sets that AI models are learning on. And that, and you're absolutely right, the person who just spoke, that, huge private corporations are the ones that are able to afford these big GPUs. And that's potentially also an area to keep watching.
Thank you, and very concerning.
If I can add just one other alternative to the Stable Diffusion as well, there's a model, or I guess like an architecture and a way of training that's been released, which uses the exact same technology as ChatGPT, but you can mess with it yourself. It's called Open Assistant, and it was produced by Meta. And you can implement whatever language model size you can train on your GPU, anywhere from a few 100 million parameters all the way up to 65 billion. So you can achieve extremely good performance with it, and it's completely open source. You can train it on your data in an institution. And I can put a link to that as well.
Thank you. Did anyone else have a question? I saw Miriam's hand up before, but I don't see any others.
I had a comment. It was kind of then mentioned after. I was just thinking about using ChatGPT for school, and I've seen a lot of other people use it, and then I try to use it to just source data, and I asked it to provide me with information, but everything it provided me with, none of the links worked, or when I searched up like the names of the studies or whatever, I couldn't find anything, and I was like, okay, I'm not sure where this is coming from then. And I know that some of the links are expired because it hasn't been updated since 2021, but the other ones, I'm like, are these just made up?
That's a great point. Thank you. Susanna Eklund also, Eklund, is that how you pronounce your name? I'm sorry. Made an extremely valid point that in the chat related to the issue of carbon footprint, climate, the European Climate Manifesto, and the climate footprint of these technologies. As Liam pointed out, these technologies use vast amounts of computational power. Computational power costs, uses energy. Energy creates carbon footprint. And we should be concerned about the carbon footprint that our sector may end up producing as a result. Allison or Heli, or you want to comment on that at all?
May I say something? I was in a Biculture webinar the other day, and they present some very good case studies for circular tourism mostly. And one chateau in France, actually, they couldn't heat the place, so they rented out a server room. So the servers produce a lot of heat, and the heat hits the building. So in a way, the one cancels the other. So this is a very interesting way to go about it.
I could, if I may, I could comment
Yes, please.
this environmental thing issue. Samus, you said the word responsibility in your summary, and I think that is also something that we bear in mind, that the area is so complex. I mean, the workshops that we've been conducting among research libraries, and only just a few people in the same room, and we can see that there are so many viewpoints on the local setting, not to mention the global setting, that it requires a lot of time and intelligence sharing with your peers and also colleagues, for example, from IT department of your university or organization, to really understand how this. So I would say, again, we have more questions than answers, but it just requires time to work on these. And as these responsible actions are in our strategies, then we just have to find ways to not to get over enthusiastic about all the possibilities, as Eng was also presenting in your survey results. Some think that AI will solve every problem. Well, it won't. And so that's, so we need to discuss more, and I'm looking forward to the conferences, for example, like Fantastic Futures, that perhaps we are getting more opinions and viewpoints, how to do this, how to really find the ways to tackle all these complexities.
That was very helpful. I noticed that Sonika Zell made a very interesting suggestion that a joint European event to promote open source AI for the cultural sector might be a good idea. I think we'll we could encourage. We should encourage that as well. I think that's good. I'm sure others of you agree. Are there other questions or suggestions or comments or thoughts?
I wouldn't like to take the floor too
Go
much, but I would I made a note about your question, how can we build competencies more efficiently? And I want to share with you, first of all, I thank you, Alison, I thank you, Eng, because I think that your presentation showed that we can share so much across the sectors and the borders. Alison, you said that the museum sector is different, but I've seen similar experiments from, for example, the National Library of Norway, who hosted the first Fantastic Futures conference. They are doing similar work, for example, with the images, and it's so that is our strength against the global big companies, the for-profit companies, that if we join our forces, share across the borders, then we can really make a difference in this world and make the responsible choices. And if I can just share, yesterday we had a meeting, online meeting with the National Library of Finland, National Archives of Finland. There was no museum representative in this meeting, but we decided that we need to make, exactly as you, Seamus, said, more efficient way to build our competencies in Finland. And for that, we decided that actually working groups might be too elaborate, and online discussions, open discussions, open forums like AI for LAMS, that is the way to go forward also on national level. So just Slack forums, or as we noticed in this Europeana, email posting lists are not the way to do it. Something else is required, because otherwise our emails are just jammed, and that is not the most efficient way. So something like that, I would really welcome Europeana opening some easy and low threshold forum for these discussions. Any thoughts of that? And if you in the participants, I would like to know if there are these cross-sector local collaborations in your communities, archives, libraries, museums, educational institutions.
I think those are great suggestions. We have another question from, it's absolutely the case that we need to develop some mechanism for this kind of collaborative competence acquisition, knowledge development, skills development in the sector. We also need shared data sets that we can use, and this is what makes the emergent concept of data spaces so important in this area. Possibility of being able to collaborate and share data sets, training data sets in particular. Alison or Eng, do you have any comments that you'd like to add, or maybe you'd like to respond to the question from Paulo C?
I just wanted to say that I think that this was a wonderful opportunity for us to all share in this experimentation. And I think I'd love to hear more about what other museums are doing. And I'm not sure where the forum is, but this is a good beginning of the conversation. So I appreciate everyone's input. It's been very interesting.
Okay.
I'll just add that I was on a research residency recently, and what I found interesting was the balance between structured time and unstructured time in terms of working together. And it was actually, we had some very interesting discussions that were completely unstructured and open. And I think this webinar is an example of how you could have an interesting conversation with many people online. But also being together in a room with, physically in a room with people is also extremely valuable and can bring up very interesting discussions and ideas as well.
That's a terrific reminder of the importance of utilizing very different kinds of interaction spaces. I think, Stephen, I turn back to you. First of all, I thank everybody who participated, and especially our speakers. And Stephen, I turn back to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't have that much to say or to add, except for my part again. Thank you so much all for speaking. Thank you, Seamus, for moderating. Thank you all for attending and your questions. And well, I suppose we'll see each other again, hopefully live in one way or another, because I agree with Eng, that would be really important too. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.